Hello and welcome to my July Unhaul. I guess this will be pre-filming. Pre-filming is fun. I have 8 books to unhaul today. I usually wait for my unhauls till I have like a bigger stack because this is kind of a brief unhaul for me, but I'm moving and needed to get rid of these books. So we're filming this now and I will be removing these books from my house. This is pretty much like a rehash of my last 2 months of words wrap-ups. Yeah, most of these books I read in like in May and June just because I did an unhaul in May, I think. So if you've seen those wrap-ups, this might be a little bit repetitive to you, but that's fine. People like unhauls. So to get started, Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. Not a fan. I found this kind of boring. But I also read this over the course of like 2.5 years. So yeah, I should have just gone back and reread everything, but I didn't like this book and I was like 2/3 done and I just wanted to finish it. Should have unhauled it or reread it, or should have DNF'd it or reread it, but I just wanted to finish it, and like I already knew the ending because it'd been spoiled for me, which is fine. You pretty much know the ending going into this book. It's like one of those books, which is fine. But yeah, I gave it 2 stars. I just wasn't a fan. I didn't like the way he treated his, I want to say girlfriend, but like they didn't date. The girl he had a crush on, his love interest. I didn't like the way she was treated in the book. And I really didn't like the story. It was kind of bland. I didn't like the characters and just, wasn't a fan. Also can't really talk about it. I don't remember the first 2/3. But I wasn't liking it when I started it either. Then we have Ordinary Men, Reserve Police Battalion 101, and The Final Solution in Poland by Christopher R. Browning. This was nonfiction. I actually gave this 3 stars, I think. I did enjoy this book. It was like a lot of worthwhile information, but kind of packaged in a very dry academic way. Like, it was just one of those books. Like, it's about this reserve police battalion and like how much mass murder they committed in Poland during World War II, and like this battalion was responsible for the death of like 80,000 Jews, which is like absurd. And the book basically takes a stance of like anyone could be put into that situation and become like a killer. Like these men in particular weren't like sociopaths or anything. They were just men, you know, like they were, you know, just middle-aged like family men who had careers and like were put into this situation, and like it was traumatic for them to become killers, and then they got used to it. And it's kind of like about that, like, and it also talks about how not every man in the unit did commit murder. Like some of them actively refused, and it was really interesting perspective, because usually when you read about the Holocaust, you're reading from the perspective of the Jews or like Jewish sympathizers or like people who helped them, and this was very much like about the Nazis, which was really interesting and like so horrifying. Like not like more horrifying, but I think at a point it's kind of like normal to read about like the perspective of victims in a situation, and it's like horrifying in a very different way to read about the perpetrators and read like, oh, like committing like murdering hundreds of people in a row gave them like PTSD, and it's like you don't feel bad for them really, but it's just like you never really think about it that way, or I never really thought about it that way, and it's really interesting. But it was kind of dry for me, and it was just the kind of thing where like I don't need to have this book on my shelf. It was also really short. It was like less than 200 pages. I don't know. Springwort, do not be bad and make noise. But this is one that I pass along, and like I'm sure someone else will enjoy it. And then we have Green Suede Shoes, an Irish American Odyssey by Larry Kirwan. He is the lead singer of Black 47, which is a rock band, and I am not the biggest fan of Larry Kirwan. I like his band. Had not heard of him before picking up this book, so like 90% of this just comes with the caveat of was not a Black 47 fan, but having read this book, I now like their music and not so much him. That's about where we are. But he included like, what am I saying? He included lyrics with every chapter, so I listened to a lot of their music and enjoyed their music and enjoyed like the politics of the book. He talked about like politics in Ireland a lot. His father was like an Irish Republican. It was really interesting. And then he talked a lot about the music scene in New York in like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, which was less interesting to me. And he talked about his music, his record label, less interesting. And then he went on a rant at the end about like how music today is a non-essential luxury. And I was like, okay, my dude. Okay. I don't know. I wasn't a fan. I was about to be like, this book was fine, but I wasn't a fan of Larry Kirwan, so clearly not for me. And it sort of just turned into, I don't really like Larry Kirwan. I find him very annoying and pretentious. And like pretentious in that way that he puts a lot of effort into it. And like, he thinks things are better than others because of like their prestige kind of, yeah. Like that person who's like, pop punk isn't real punk and it's bad, and it's like, it's a different music genre, my dude, calm down. He struck me as very much that kind of person, and I was very, very tired of him. He was a little bit exhausting, so if you're a fan of Black 47 or Larry Kirwan, like, I'm sure you will enjoy this. I was not, so I really shouldn't have picked it up, but now I have a new band that I like, which is always fun. Love Maybe by Heather Hepler. This is a YA contemporary that's just like very fluffy and cute and sweet, and it's about a girl whose birthday is on Valentine's Day, and she is cynical about love. Her mother has had 2 husbands that have both left her, and her best friend has just been dumped by a guy, and yeah, it's a sweet, fluffy little YA contemporary. I thought it was middle grade. I would have been more down for the sweetness and fluffiness had they been like 12, but since they were all like 17, it was a little bit much for me. If you like this kind of thing, you would probably enjoy it fine. It was just, I did want something happy when I picked this up, and this was happy, so it served its purpose. It wasn't bad. It was just not for me. Just very romancy. You know, in that like, I don't want to say shallow way. It was just so fluffy. I don't really get along with books that are just obscenely fluffy like this, which is fine. I really thought this was middle grade. I can do fluffy when it's like middle grade, because like they're 12, but like when they're 17 and they're like working jobs and there are real consequences here, it's just like, I don't know. Not for me, but it was a fine book. Like, I have no like real criticisms of it other than like, not for me. And then we have Stolen Lives, 20 Years in a Desert Jail by Malika Oufkir and Michele Fitoussi. This is about a woman who was the daughter of General Oufkir in Morocco in the 70s or 80s. I forget the dates exactly. He staged a coup against the king, and he was executed, and his whole family was sent to prison. His wife and like 7 children from like, I think Malika was like 20-ish at the time, and his youngest was like 2. And they basically spent 20 years of their lives in various forms of like jail, imprisonment, and exile. It varied, but some of the conditions were very, very bad. Interesting book, interesting memoir, something I hadn't known anything about, but it was kind of like, I don't know, there were some issues in this book, I think, with like the editing and the storytelling, because again, she was in prison with like very little access to the outside world for so many years, and like her sense of time was limited, and I think it really affected like how she viewed situations and how she like constructed situations in a way, like in her like mentally, like things she wrote about as happening simultaneously I think probably didn't, and it had to do more with like the way she experienced it in her imprisonment. And I think some editing would have helped this book, because it wound up feeling like there were things I questioned that weren't true, like factually untrue, and then things that like felt untrue, like that didn't make sense together, logically speaking. And I think it just had to do with her imprisonment. Like I think that affected her perception of events, and I think some editing would have like helped clear that up. And then just in general, I didn't love her so much. I was a lot more interested in the situation than her as a person, and the book is a lot about like her as a person, so it wasn't bad. Like, I would recommend reading it. I think it's an interesting subject. I think it's very informative. Like, as someone with just like a totality of ignorance on the subject, it was very worth the read for me. So yeah, would recommend, just like not one that I feel like I really need to keep. We're almost done. Let's go with a book that like I hadn't read in the last 2 months, the only one. Her Fearful Symmetry by Audrey Niffenegger. I got this a while ago. I read it like a few years ago. I don't know if I ever talked about it on here, because that was when I was kind of like disappeared. This is about two twins whose aunt dies. Their aunt was their mother's twin, I think. Lots of twins. And they inherit her property in London. So they go back to London to live in her flat, because they have to live in her flat for a year in order to inherit it. And there's ghost stuff going on in romance, and like, I like this book okay. Like, it was fine. I don't have any real criticisms of it. It was just the kind of thing where like, it was not for me. I don't really like supernatural ghost stories, and like, this was fine, but like, I don't know. I kept it because like I gave it 3 stars, and I was like, yeah, it was a good book. That was definitely worth reading. And like, the longer I looked at it on my shelf, the more I was just like, I don't need to keep this book. Like, it was fine. Like, I would recommend it if you look at a description and it sounds interesting to you, because it was like well done. I thought it was a good book. It was just like, I don't really like supernatural ghosty stories, and there were some weird things that happened that I didn't love, but like, weren't bad things, just like weird things. And I don't know, it was just like, this wasn't for me, but it was a fine book, so I feel like people enjoy this. Like, I would recommend this if you like kind of supernatural ghosty stories that aren't like horror. It's like very like contemporary drama vibes, but also like ghosts. So I don't know, read it if it sounds good, because it wasn't like bad. And then something that was bad. A Good Neighborhood by Therese and Fowler. Yeah, this is a book about race and racism, written by a white woman who has clearly never experienced racism. She started the book with like an author's note at the beginning. She saw Zadie Smith give a talk, and in that talk, an audience member asked if white authors should ever or could ever write black characters, and Zadie Smith essentially answered like, write what you want. Do your homework. If you're gonna write characters that aren't like you, like, do your homework. And she was like, oh, so like, it is okay for me to write black characters. And like, it's not that I disagree with that. Like, that's not my point here. My point was, why do you feel the need to start a book saying, this black person told me it was okay to write this? Like, that rubbed me the wrong way. Like, a lot. Like, write this book. But like, she had to start with, Zadie Smith said it was okay for white authors to write black characters, so that's why I can write this, and you can't question that. And it was like, why do you feel the need to say that? Like, why do you feel the need to open this book justifying it that way? Like, why? And the whole book was kind of like that, where like, it was just trying way too hard and like not actually handling the issues well at all. Yeah, I did not like this at all. It was very much like cut and dry, like good versus bad, in a way that like doesn't make sense for a book that's supposed to be about like contemporary racism in like very subtle ways a lot. And like, it just, I don't know, I wasn't a fan. I don't like it. I think it was like very poorly done. It reminded me of like a shallow Jodi Picoult book, which like, I don't even like Jodi Picoult anymore, and this was just like worse. I don't know, it wasn't good. This was an arc too, so like, whoops. I I was supposed to like do a book club for it at my old job at the bookstore before I got fired, and like I'm so glad I didn't have to do that, because I don't know how I could have sat there with a bunch of people and not been like, this book is racist. But also I'm at work, so I can't say that. I didn't enjoy this. I wouldn't recommend it. Some people have loved it, but like I did not. I'm never gonna think about this again. I don't know. If you like it, good for you. But I saw no value in it. It was so pretentious. Like, oh, the writing was so pretentious. I am gonna stop talking about it. The Bright Forever by Lee Martin. I have no thoughts on this book. I gave it 3 stars. I read it. I know I read it. No memory, no thoughts. It's about a missing girl. A 9-year-old goes missing from like an affluent family in, I think, the 70s. I think, and this is from like the point of view of like a bunch of people in the town, like her brother, a school teacher who's like a pedophile, this kind of ne'er-do-well guy, his wife, like variety of people in the town, like some unreliable narrators. This was like the most nothing of nothing books. It's just a void. Like, I did not dislike it, but neither did I feel anything for it. 3 stars might have been generous. I don't know. Like, I saved 2 stars for books I actively dislike, and I didn't dislike this because disliking something requires having a feeling for it. Like, I have to feel something towards a book in order to dislike it, and I just felt nothing to this. I don't remember this. What is this? Like, why? Yeah, so Unhaul. Apparently it's won awards. I think at some point I've read that it won awards. Maybe I made that up. It's also like falling apart. Like, you can literally like, there are pages at the beginning that are like coming out. Yeah, it's like literally coming out. So I was probably gonna unhaul this anyway. But maybe someone somewhere will enjoy this, but it wasn't bad. It just wasn't anything. Okay, so that was the 8 books that I'm unhauling today. I managed to lengthen that out, draw that out into a very long, unnecessarily long video, so I'm gonna conclude this, go drop them off at a little free library, and like prepare to move at this point now that I'm committed to moving all of these books, which is going to be fun. So as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.